Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Bruce Delmonico, Assistant Dean for Admissions here at the Yale School of Management. I'm thrilled today to welcome Rodrigo Canales, Associate Professor for Organizational Behavior here at Yale SOM for the next in our speaker series, our summer speaker series. We're looking to share the wonderful expertise of our faculty with you all and are happy that you've joined us for today. So just to give a sense of how the session will go. We have about an hour and Professor Canales will plan to speak for maybe sort of 30, 40 minutes on the topic of innovation in complex systems, which is an area of his research and teaching. And then we will reserve some time for question and answer, which I will moderate. And please, as you have questions, please use the chat function of the Zoom session to ask your questions, and I will try to get as many of them to Professor Canales as possible. As I mentioned, Professor Canales, he teaches in organizational behavior. He teaches the Innovator core course as well as other courses here at SOM. He does his research in the intersection of organizational theory and institutional theory with a special interest in the role of institutions for economic development. He specifically studies how individuals are affected by and in turn change complex organizations and systems, and which will be the topic of his talk today. He received his undergraduate degree from Universidad Iberoamericana and his MBA and PhD from MIT, a little to the north of us, where he sits on the advisory board for the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values. So without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Professor Canales for your talk. And thank you again, Professor Canales, for joining us today.
Bruce, thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you. And I want to, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's truly a pleasure and a delight to be here. And I want to welcome all of you to the conversation. It's unusual and a little bit awkward for me because I don't see any of you. I know that you're out there, but I see none of you. It would be nice to actually be able to see you in person. And I know that these are just extremely uncertain times, and then I know that you have a lot of decisions ahead of you, and so thank you for joining, and I'm very, very happy to be here. As Bruce mentioned, my biggest kind of research interests are always in understanding how complex systems are changed by people. You know, at the end of the day, systems are created by people, are maintained by people, and therefore it can only be people who change them. We often think of systems as these kind of monolithic machines, and we sometimes forget that because they're inhabited by individuals, it is only individuals who can change them. And so that's kind of the focus of my research. Most of my efforts lately have been centered on issues of police reform, especially in Latin America and Mexico, but also in other places. And I've been kind of immersed in this question of how do we go about changing police organizations and the relationships that police organizations have with the public and with other agencies. And so I've spent kind of a lot of time in my past few years doing that research, combined with other work on the question of how do we bring evidence into how we think about public policy and how we think about international development interventions. So what I'm going to do today is I am going to give you kind of a bit of a teaser on the kinds of issues that we discuss in my class in the innovator perspective. We thought it would be useful for you to get a little bit of a sense for the kinds of topics that we discuss in the classroom. My class is a core class, meaning all MBA students have to take it, whether they like it or not. And so I'm gonna kind of give a presentation about some of the key topics that are covered in my class. And of course, it's going to be very compressed, and I'm going to have to kind of skip through a lot of things. But the main goal is for me to talk for maybe about half an hour or so, and then leave some time for questions at the end. And I'm going to be very happy to take any questions about anything. And also, if at any point in time you feel like you would like to raise a question about the stuff that I'm presenting, as I'm presenting it, I have the chat here next to me. And if there's something that pops up, I'll try to address it as I'm talking. So thank you again. And I'm going to now share my slides with you. If you cannot see them, please let me know on the chat. I'm going to assume that you can. And I'm going to start talking about the topic of today, which is this issue of innovation in complex systems. And you know, one of the starting points for this talk is if you notice, innovation has become a little bit of a fad lately. Everybody seems to be talking about innovation. Every organization seems to want to drive innovation. Every organization seems to claim that they are innovative. And surely there's a faddish aspect to it. Surely there's some just fashion element to why everybody's all of a sudden talking about innovation. But I would argue that there's also kind of an underlying fundamental issue that is driving so many important organizations to be kind of focused and one would say even obsessed with the question of innovation. And I think it has to do with the nature of the problems that we're facing and how the nature of those problems has been changing in time. So I'm going to give you kind of two quick examples or two quick stories that are examples of this. And then I'm going to start unpacking some of them a little bit further in the rest of the talk. So let's talk about healthcare first. I'm sure many of you know or have heard of the Mayo Clinic. Undoubtedly, the Mayo Clinic is one of the most innovative healthcare organizations, but I would claim even just organizations in general across sectors. It's certainly one of the most innovative in the world. If you were to look up the number of patents, treatments, discoveries that have come from the Mayo Clinic network, it's quite impressive. And it's often the case that patients from all over the world with the most complicated conditions go to the Mayo Clinic because they know kind of if the Mayo Clinic, if there's one place that can help you, it will be the Mayo Clinic, even for the most complicated things. And it's because they have a radically different approach to healthcare that's kind of from the day it was founded more than 100 years ago. The Mayo Clinic was organized around this idea of patient-centered care, which is now kind of, people are trying to roll it out as a standard across healthcare with a lot of complexity. But the Mayo Clinic was a pioneer in that. And even though that's true, even though the Mayo Clinic has been one of the most innovative organizations for a long time, and even though they have been a pioneer in every element of medicine throughout their history, for a number of years now, the leadership at the Mayo Clinic has been truly concerned that the Mayo Clinic, are not achieving the type of innovation that they need. And so they've been trying to make a lot of investments in, for example, creating a center for innovation and creating kind of innovation task forces within the Mayo Clinic and across with other partners. And the reason is for this kind of puzzle of like, how is it that the most innovative organization in healthcare claims or is preoccupied that they're not innovating enough? If you think about the nature of the problems that we're facing in healthcare, they have changed quite a bit. If you think about how healthcare has traditionally been organized, it's around what we often call the break-fix model, meaning, if you have an injury, for example, it's kind of the way your car would work, right? If you're driving one day and then the check engine light comes on, you're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to go to the mechanic. You get to the mechanic does a bunch of tests and tells you, oh, this is what's wrong with your car. You're going to need to leave it here for a few days. And then you can pick it up. And that's kind of how healthcare has been organized so far. We have a health problem. We go to the doctor. They conduct a bunch of tests. Based on that, they diagnose the issue, and then they give us a treatment, and then they send us back home. And like a mechanic shop that is organized around the needs of the mechanic, because that's the most sensible way to do it, in the break-fix model of healthcare, the healthcare system is organized around the needs of doctors, right? But again, if you think about the most important problems in healthcare today, they don't sit well within this kind of break-fix model, because if you think about big issues that we're facing, for example, the diabetes epidemic in the US and in many developing countries, diabetes is extremely easy to diagnose, but you can't fix it, you can't cure it. It's a condition that needs to be managed throughout a person's life. And that means that the right approach is to develop a different type of relationship with the patient that is long lasting, lifelong, in fact. And you want to help them create a support structure and a different set of habits to manage their condition throughout their life, so that that condition doesn't generate other sets of problematic issues. if you think about also, one of the main goals of healthcare is to keep people alive, right? And we've been quite good at that. The life expectancy of people has been increasing dramatically through time. And at the same time, it creates the challenge that we have a very large aging population. And the issue of managing an aging population is that, again, old people there's nothing wrong with being old. And there's a bunch of healthcare needs that arise just from old age that can't be fixed. They need to be managed. And it's the same thing as diabetes, right? You need to establish a long-term relationship between patients and their caregivers, including doctors and nurses, but also including their family members and their friends. And so if you think about what that implies for healthcare, is that the way we were organized before is just not well suited to the current needs of the system. And if you add to that kind of how the amount of specialization that we reached in healthcare has also increased the complexity of the administration of healthcare. We now have a healthcare system that has kind of a massive administrative burden to the point where burnout rates amongst doctors are the highest in history, in the US at least. But the main claim for why doctors are getting burned out is not that they're working too much, is that they're working too little on the things that they want to do, which is help patients. And they're spending inordinate amounts of time dealing with administrative issues. And that's what's burning them out. And so again, if you think about how the model has evolved and the problems that have generated, the current model is just not well suited to address these problems. And so let's keep that in the back of our minds as kind of story number one. Now I'm going to shift context radically. And let's talk a little bit about an issue that I'm sure you've heard a lot about, which is HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is a problem that came from UNICEF. UNICEF has a really interesting innovation unit within it. And this is a problem that they worked on, and I kind of researched through them. So if you think about, like, I'm sure all of you have heard about the HIV/AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, it has many layers and many, I'm going to go back to the other slide because I don't want you to get distracted by that. It has many layers and many complex issues around it. But one of the kind of most tragic components of the HIV/AIDS epidemic is cases where mothers who are HIV positive, they become pregnant. And then when they give birth, their child is born with an HIV infection. And what's kind of tragic about it is that there has been a solution for this for a long time. There's a treatment. There's a very simple and cheap treatment that expecting mothers can take that ensures that the child will not be infected when the child is born. But of course, the issue is that the mother needs to know that she is HIV positive before giving birth in order for her to take this treatment. And what was happening in sub-Saharan Africa was that very often mothers they just didn't know that they were infected. And so they weren't receiving the treatment they needed. So what does the structure look like? This is Uganda in particular, who partnered with UNICEF to work on this issue. So in the Ugandan healthcare system, it has kind of three big layers to it, if you want to think about it that way. This is the public healthcare system, which is really the most important one. It has the district hospitals, which kind of serve areas of around 200,000 people. And if you live in rural Uganda, in order for you to be served at a district hospital, first you need to get there. And usually it's going to take you about a day of a commute because, you have to get on the little bus that's going to take you to the big bus that's going to take you to the next bus that's going to take you to the place where the district hospital is. And once you get there, they operate on a first come, first served basis. And so you kind of write your name on the list, and then when it's your turn, you'll be seen by a doctor. And that means that sometimes you'll have to wait maybe a couple of days. And they make the best of it. They bring all their stuff and they hang out with friends there. And it's not necessarily an unpleasant wait, but what it does mean is that if you're a rural Ugandan, if you go to the district hospital, you're going to basically spend between 3 and 5 days for that visit, between the commute back and forth and then the wait time while you're there. most rural Ugandans live on a day-by-day basis, and kind of renouncing 5 days of income is an incredible investment by a family. You're only going to make it when something is really wrong, right? In the middle, between district hospitals and your hometown, there are these health centers, and they are kind of located in areas that cover about 10,000 people each. And you should imagine these health centers to have usually either a medical resident who is doing their training there, and or, for example, nurse practitioners who can take care of some of the most standard issues of healthcare, including vaccines and kind of diagnosis and treatment for simple things, but not for the more complex ones, right? And so these places help you determine whether you need to go to the district hospital, and they can kind of help you with more routine issues. But again, because they tend to be fewer of these, and they cover areas of about 10,000 people each, it still takes you at least 4 or 5 hours to get to the health center that's closest to you. So you're still going to lose about a day of your life if you need to go there. And again, you're only going to make that investment if there's something kind of wrong with you. Aside from this, what you have are community health workers, and these are the people who are actually embedded in the communities. But what's critical about this is that these people don't actually work for the healthcare system. They tend to be volunteers. They tend to be kind of community healers, sangomas, things like that, who then realized that they kind of needed or could use some kind of modern medicine training to complement their traditional healing methods, and to also help identify people who need a different type of treatment. But they are kind of the point of connection between villages and the healthcare system, because these volunteer community health workers are the ones who are spending all their time in the communities. And so when we take it back to the issue of HIV/AIDS, the way it works is that it is these community health workers who are tasked with identifying women who are pregnant and then letting them know that they need to get tested, right? And so the way it used to work is, I am a community health worker, I identify that you're pregnant. And so I say, like, we need to get you tested for HIV today. So I take a DNA sample from you, I then package it, I send it to the community health center. They then receive it, and then they send it up to the district hospital. They do the testing in the district hospital, which is a fully equipped hospital. And it also kind of follows a first come, first serve method, where you get into a queue, you go through the queue, they do the test on your sample, then they send the results down to the health center, and then the health center lets the community health worker know, so that then the community health worker can look for the person in the village and let them know that their test was positive or negative. And so what was happening with shocking frequency is that community health workers were identifying women who were pregnant. They were convincing them to get tested. They were sending the samples, but this process of going up the chain and down the chain was taking anywhere between 3 and 6 months. And so it was happening a lot that by the time the results came back, for example, that the woman was indeed positive, she had already given birth, and we already weren't able to give her the treatment that she needed. And that was kind of the puzzle that the Ugandan government posed to UNICEF, is like, how can we help kind of streamline this process so that we have a better and a quicker way to identify women and help them. I could give you 6 other examples of these kinds of complicated problems that have been evolving and that kind of create a different type of need for innovation, including from my own research on kind of police reform and improving relationships, both improving the organization of the police, but also improving how the police relate to citizens. So let me kind of fast forward and then say, well, what do all these complex problems that we're facing out there have in common? And I would argue that, first of all, they have this characteristic that, on the one hand, the problem seems to be kind of slow moving, but at the same time, it's potentially devastating, right? If you look at healthcare, for example, in most advanced countries, in expectation, healthcare is kind of bankrupt. Like, the way the healthcare system in the US is evolving and the projections of the current system basically tell us that the system is bankrupt it's going to be bankrupt in the near future. And if you think about it, like if a country's healthcare system collapses, it's kind of a national security issue, right? And so even though the problem has been slow moving for a number of years, it is truly potentially devastating, right? And the same with a lot of the complex problems we're facing. At the same time, part of what makes these problems complicated is that they sit at the intersections of different sectors and different organizations. In particular, these are problems that are not going to be solved by the market. In many cases, they were generated by the market. In other cases, they just sit at a blind spot of the market. And so the market is not going to solve them. And in fact, the problems kind of require different sectors and different organizations to work on them together because the problem kind of sits at the intersection of them. So if you think about healthcare, for example, nobody really owns that problem, right? There's no one hospital group or government or an insurance company that owns that problem. All of them do. And that means that all of them have to work together to find a solution. And what often happens is that when everybody's responsible, then nobody's responsible. Think about the Uganda case as well, right? Who owns that problem? Where? Well, kind of everybody. And you need the participation of different sectors and different organizations to solve it. It's also the case that kind of quote unquote the good or the right or the quote unquote easy solutions are not available. Meaning, you could argue that in Uganda what you need is just better infrastructure. We just need better healthcare infrastructure, and we also need a better infrastructure to move information up and down the chain. Sure, of course, I give you that. And how long is it going to take us to build it? And are you going to be the one who's going to tell the women whose kids are being born with HIV/AIDS that they need to wait the 10 or 20 or 30 years that it's going to take us to build a new healthcare infrastructure? And so, yes, the right solution is to build new institutions or to change the education system or to build new infrastructure. But those solutions are kind of not available with the speed and urgency that is required by the problems. And another kind of characteristics of these problems is that the solutions that we have traditionally used for other problems in the past are just not well suited for these problems. In many cases, in fact, these problems are the result of the effective things that we've done in the past. Like, for example, the proportion of an aging population that we manage today. Like, we've been effective in healthcare and we're keeping people alive for a longer period of time. Or we've become so good at specializing in different parts of healthcare that now the administrative complexity of our healthcare system is massive, right? And so the system itself and the way it normally solves problems is not going to be able to solve the problem that it itself generated. And so the typical solutions just don't work for these kinds of problems. Also because, as I mentioned, they don't sit within the realm of the traditional realm of organizations. They sit kind of at the intersections, right? And so usually organizations have methods for solving the problems that sit within their realm, and that's the methods that they have. They don't have good methods for solving problems that sit at the intersections, right? And the last thing I'll say about what these problems have in common is that part of what makes them so difficult is that they're complex. The systems that we've designed are incredibly complicated, and they're interconnected in unexpected ways and sometimes in inscrutable ways. And so when you try and find solutions to only one part of the problem, or only one part of the system, what you then discover is that things kind of start reverberating across the system in ways that you hadn't anticipated or expected. And so, you know, the complexity of our systems and the complexity of our markets and the things we've built make these problems harder to tackle. So I would argue that because of all of these reasons, most organizations are finding that they are facing problems that they hadn't faced before and for which they're just not well prepared. And so going back to the Ugandan example, you know, originally when Uganda approached UNICEF, what they said was, you know, we need you to help us design an IT infrastructure that will help us better connect the communities with the district hospitals so that we can kind of have a more nimble process. And so UNICEF said, okay, that's an interesting first hypothesis that we need an IT system, and it seems reasonable, given that at the end of the day, this is information that is traveling. But first thing we need for an IT system to work is we need electricity, and we need reliable electricity. But this is what kind of a nighttime map of sub-Saharan Africa looks like, and this is how spotty electricity coverage is. And we know that it's not only scarce, but that it's also intermittent. It's not quite reliable, right? And so just from looking at this, and obviously doing some field research, the UNICEF team said, like, that's just a non-starter. We are not going to have a good solution in IT, because the first thing that we need is just not kind of available. I'm looking at the question that is being posted in the Sure, you'll see that we're going to get to this question from Jasmine. So you'll see that we're going to get to it in a second. So what role do players like international nonprofits or other kind of intermediary actors can have? So anyway, this was the first part of them was like, well, we don't have reliable electricity, so that poses an issue for our intuition for what we need. The second thing we need for an IT system to work is information, right? We need to have codified information that we can then send up and down the chain. But this is what the filing system in a district hospital in Uganda looks like. And so I remember visiting one of these, and we were visiting, one of the things we said was like, okay, that's complicated, but at least it's color coded. But then they said like, oh, no, actually, no, the color code doesn't mean anything. It just means like most of our paper comes from either donations or from remnants from other places. And we just print things out in the color that they arrive, right? And so it's not even that it was color coded. It's just, so it makes it even more confusing. It's a non-signal that looks like a signal. And so then again, it's like, well, how long is it going to take us to digitize all this information to be able to put it into a digital system? That's just not going to work. The solution is probably not there. And so what the UNICEF team did is that they spent kind of a lot of time doing field work where the problem actually was being felt, which is the women who are pregnant in the communities. And they were kind of looking at what's the journey that they go throughout their pregnancy and their contacts with the healthcare system. And what they found is that almost 100% of the contacts they had with the healthcare system was with the community health workers. And so then it became very evident that the linchpin of this problem was going to be the community health workers, because they are the only point of contact between the healthcare system and these women. And so now we need to truly understand these community health workers. So they spent most of their field work trying to understand how these community health workers work, what they need, how they solve problems, etc. And one of the things that they noticed was that 100% of them had cell phones, which is true of now most people in sub-Saharan Africa. These cell phones that are not necessarily smartphones, in many cases they're dumb phones, become kind of their most trusted tool for a lot of things, including sending and receiving money, and of course accessing information about a number of things. So once they saw that all community health workers had cell phones, they looked at cell phone coverage, and it turns out that cell phone coverage is actually really good. And it's quite reliable because, again, most of the population has become reliant on it. And so now it kind of became clear that whatever solution we have is going to need to sit, it's going to need to focus on community health workers, and is going to need to sit in the cell phone network. And kind of the first response of the government was like, well, that can't be. Because A, community health workers are not our employees. And so that's not, quote unquote, our problem that we can't solve through them. And when we include the cell phone network, that means that we're relying on private actors. We don't own that network, whereas we would own the IT infrastructure that I was asking you for. And the UNICEF response was like, sure, but if you want me to do that, I'm out, because we're not going to solve the problem. I understand what you're saying about these people not being your employees and needing to partner with private companies, but if you want to solve the problem, that's what we need to do. So through that work and through kind of a broad partnership, they established this methodology of putting the community health worker at the center of their analysis, and then finding ways to either solve or help them solve the key problems that they faced, or also help them create the right motivations and the right incentives and the right support structure so that they could be more successful in their work. And through this process, they were able to kind of reduce the time that it took to go from sample to diagnosis from an average of 66 days that could go up to as much as 6 months to an average of 16 days that had a very, very tight distribution around it. You could very reliably get your results back in less than 3 weeks. And it also had a different queuing system where if you met a woman who was kind of further down her term, you could actually prioritize that case. So the way this worked is that the community health worker takes the sample, immediately sends a text message to the central, to a central system in the district hospital that immediately creates a record in a database that is linked to a test kit that the community health worker now sends directly to the district hospital. And in that initial text message, you can say whether this is an urgent case or not, depending on how far along the woman is in her pregnancy. So then when the sample arrives there, it's already linked to a number in the database. I already know whether I need to prioritize it or not. I test it when I test it, and then I immediately send a text message that goes directly back to the community health worker, who can then inform the woman of the situation. And this system kind of worked surprisingly well, and it generated all these other unexpected benefits. For example, they discovered that once this system was set in place, community health workers began using it not just for this diagnostic problem, but also to share information between each other, and to kind of exchange experiences and learn from each other. All right, so again, what I think can we learn from these issues and others that we be discussing, for example, in my class about why we need to study innovation. And so I'm going to try to move through this as quickly as possible so that we can get to some of these questions. One is that there's just a lot of misconceptions about innovation. And one of the most typical and one of the most pervasive ones is that innovation is about creativity. We tend to think that innovation is just about coming up with ideas. But actually, if you look at the history of ideas, what you will find is that there are a number of excellent ideas that just never succeeded, or there were ideas that were identical when they came up at very similar times, but then one of them failed and one of them succeeded. There are also many really bad ideas that have somehow become a thing or have succeeded. And so it's not just about idea generation. It cannot be, right? Otherwise, good ideas would always succeed and bad ideas would always fail, and that's not what we observe. We also observe that, again, it's not so much about the quality of the idea, but that when ideas fail, it tends to be kind of later in the process. Something tends to happen as people are developing their ideas that allows them to succeed or fail. And often luck has a big component to play in there. We also observe that most established organizations, and by the way, otherwise extremely successful and quote unquote smart organizations, tend to be terrible at managing innovation. And the main reason is that, I think it's well summarized in this succinct phrase from Jim March, who's one of the most prolific and most cited organizational scholars. Jim used to say that most new ideas are not good, and most good ideas are not new. And if you sit with this quote for a little bit, you'll see just how much information is packed into it, right? Most new ideas are not good, almost by definition. When you're solving a problem for the first time, you don't really know what you're doing because nobody has solved it before. And so the first iterations of your ideas are usually going to be bad, and they're going to look bad. And so you need to kind of develop those ideas a lot. By the time those ideas become good, they tend not to be new anymore, right? But they kind of have to develop to the point where they become good and not new. And innovation is kind of what happens in the middle of these two statements. The problem is that partly because of the misconceptions we have about innovation, most organizations and most people don't have the patience, the persistence, or the discipline to allow ideas to evolve from being good, new and not very good, to being good but no longer new. We tend to kill ideas way too early in the process, and we tend not to have a good process for shepherding this development from new and not good to good and no longer that new. We also tend to think that innovation is only about products or technologies. And when we do that, we tend to neglect some of the most important sources of innovation, or the most important problems, or the most important places where problems sit, and therefore the solutions that they need. And so, you know, we tend to be pretty good at focusing on kind of this set of problems over here, kind of the product system and the product performance. But we tend to neglect a bunch of potential solutions that sometimes are the right ones, including, for example, in how we organize ourselves to solve a problem, which is one of the big issues that we face in healthcare today, including who needs to be a part of the solution, which is nicely represented in the Ugandan case. It cannot be just solved from within the healthcare system. We also need to bring in these volunteers. We need to bring in the community. We need to bring in other private partners. And very importantly, very often these bigger problems need radically different business models. We need to rethink how we go about solving a problem or providing a service. And it's in the part here where the problem sits, and therefore where the solution can be found. But when we just focus on products or technologies, we kind of neglect where the key solutions actually might be found. And so again, this is another way in which our misconceptions about innovation can get in the way. And sort of in the class that I teach, this is a slide that I present in the first class, and we present it almost every class, because I think that to move away from misconceptions, it's useful to think of innovation in two ways. One is to think about it as the creation of a viable new offering. And I think the three parts of this definition are important, in the sense that we need to think about viability, meaning until you have actually implemented something and it's standing on its own 2 feet and it survives on its own, you're not done. You have not innovated. At most, you have a hypothesis for a potential solution to a problem, but you're not done. The new part, I don't think I need to convince you of, because if it's not novel, it's not innovation. But the offering part, I think, is really important, because again, we're not just focusing on technologies or products. We could be focusing on many other ways, including how we're relating with each other when we're solving a problem, or the ways we're organized. And sometimes that's the most meaningful source of innovation. So I think this is a useful way to start thinking about innovation. I still don't think it's the most useful one, because it kind of frames innovation as a noun, whereas I think it's most useful to think about innovating as a verb. And this is what we teach in the innovator perspective. And every session that I teach, we go through this definition, and we kind of talk about different parts of the problem in different sessions, and we kind of unpack how that session informs this process of innovating. And innovating requires identifying the problems that matter and moving through them systematically to deliver elegant solutions. And so again, let's kind of unpack the different components. Problems are always evolving, and we need to have a good process and a good methodology for making sure we're identifying problems, but also that we're identifying the right problems. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute. We need to make sure that we're identifying the problems that matter, right? And so companies tend to be very good about thinking about the existing problem set that they're seeing, including, for example, with my current customers. That doesn't mean they're searching for the problems that matter, because the world is changing. And that means that the nature of problems and the actual problems are also changing. And so we need a good process for systematically searching for new problems that matter to different constituencies that are important to different organizations. And then moving through them systematically means that we actually need a process for making sure that we're tackling this problem in an effective and systematic way until we deliver an elegant solution. And I think this is a much more useful definition of innovation that helps you kind of really think about how different this is from, oh, it's just about creativity. No, creativity is the easy, quick part of this much longer, much more complicated process that is required for innovating. So what do best practices have in common? And I'm going to kind of like sprint through this so we can get through questions. The first is this idea of engaging in hyperlocal observation. How do things actually work? And again, I think the Ugandan example is a really useful one because the healthcare system have this idea of like, well, we need an IT infrastructure. And the response is like, well, fine, but I don't care what you need. I care what the problem needs. I care about what the problem needs. And that means we need to understand how things actually work out there. And out there, your IT infrastructure is still not going to solve the problem, because out there, the linchpin is actually the community health worker. And so it's not about how you wish things worked or how you think they should work. It's about how they actually work. And if the linchpin of this problem is a volunteer who doesn't work for you, then we need to kind of suck it up and we need to focus on them, because that's the only way in which we're going to truly make a dent in this problem. Second critical component of best practices is kind of entering with empathy. Really trying to understand why people behave from the perspective of those people. We tend to project a lot of our own understanding and intuition into problems, and that really can get in the way of understanding what the problem actually is, and therefore understanding what potential solutions could look like. It's critical to identify actual leverage points. So healthcare, I think, is a really useful example for this as well. Healthcare traditionally has been organized around doctors. And what we're increasingly finding is that some of the most important leverage points for healthcare are actually not doctors, because of the nature of the problems that we're facing, where the actual leverage points might be the nurses, or it might be administrators, or it might be individuals within the healthcare system that are not the people who have the higher status or who want to be more prominent in the solutions. So we need to be very disciplined about identifying not our preferred leverage points, but the actual leverage points of these complex systems. And that means we need to approach these problems with enormous humility. We need to accept that we haven't solved them because we don't know what we're doing. These are complicated problems. And if we're going to find a truly innovative solution, we need to start from the perspective that we don't know what we're doing. If we did, we would have already solved this, right? And so because we don't know what we're doing, that means we need to go out and start by questioning whether we're asking even the right question. And again, the Ugandan example is a useful one because it turns out they weren't asking the right question. And if they had stuck to that question, they wouldn't have found a solution. And so we have to accept that maybe we don't even have the question right. Einstein used to say that if they gave him 1 hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes thinking about the right question. And with the right question, he would only need 5 minutes to solve the problem. And that's true for innovating as well. We never spend enough time ensuring that we're asking the right question from the right perspective. And that once we get into that mindset, we realize that this is not about me figuring out by thinking really hard and being really creative. This is about me being out there and discovering what the right approach and what the right solution might be. That means I'm going to need to experiment a lot. And this is what best practices all have in common, just a lot of experimentation, which can become tricky and complex when you're experimenting in complex systems. And there's kind of some really interesting things that we do in the course, for example, to talk about experimentation in complex systems. Number 5, you're asking about number 5, so I'll go by, it's reframing. It's making sure we're asking the right question. A tricky one, so we're experimenting. A tricky one is, as we talked about earlier, part of the difficulty of these different types of problems is that they're sitting at the intersections of organizations and sectors, right? And so that means that no single organization can own the problem or the solution. We need to partner across organizations and across sectors. That means we need to create solution networks. And that means we need to create the frameworks that are going to allow these networks to kind of operate effectively. This is one of the trickiest and kind of most current questions in innovation research, certainly a very present question in my own work. Because if you think about the frameworks that we currently have for managing collaborations between people and between organizations, they tend to be quite rigid and quite kind of tightly defined. Whereas in innovation, by definition, because we need to discover, we need to have a lot of flexibility. We need to have a lot of trust. We need to have a lot of collaboration. And so that means we need to design radically different structures for how we work on problems together. And that includes, we need to be much more open about where the solutions can come from. And so again, going back to both the healthcare and the Uganda examples, in the Ugandan case, the government had to be convinced that, number one, the private sector needed to be a part of this, and they could actually help a lot with types of solutions, and that these community health workers also had to be kind of brought into the solution, even if we had no formal control over them. Same in healthcare. We need to accept that patients are a critical source of innovation or solutions. Nurses are a fundamental source of information and solutions for us. And finally, and this connects to the question of what's the role for intermediaries, for agencies in problems international development, we need conveners. Because we need to establish solution networks, we need kind of people who are able to build the court where everybody else is going to play. If you have a hospital group kind of being the convener, then everybody else is not going to be able to trust them that much because we know they have an agenda. And if we're going to have a truly open, collaborative partnership, that means that we need a framework that is neutral, that is transparent, and where we know that nobody's agenda is going to predominate in the solution. We need to be truly collaborative in this, right? And we need to be flexible because we're going to be discovering a lot of information in time. And, you know, each of these kind of 10 things are things that we spend a lot of time unpacking in my class, and we kind of talk about what's the issue with this barrier and what are the frameworks and the toolkits and the mindsets that can help you both anticipate it, but also solve it in a better way. So I'd like to just quickly finally say something about why I am so excited about being at SOM, why I'm so committed to my teaching at SOM, and why I truly believe that Yale SOM is changing the world. The first thing you will notice about the Yale SOM curriculum is that it looks different from other business schools. The integrated curriculum is not just a marketing tagline. It is a fundamentally different way of thinking about teaching an MBA and the skill sets that new leaders for business and society actually need. Rather than being organized around disciplines like marketing or finance or organizational behavior, we are organized around types of issues that leaders are going to face. So innovation, customer management, employee management, right? And then within each of these perspectives, we bring in all the disciplines that have something to say about this. And so in my class, we bring in psychologists and we bring in economists and we bring in sociologists to talk about the different approaches to solving these problems in an integrated way. And so our students tend to come out of the MBA experience with a much more integrated way of thinking about complexity and kind of how to draw on different disciplines to solve the challenges that exist within. And so this is one of the main reasons why I think SOM is different for addressing these complex problems that we're facing out there. And the second is that there is a very, very sincere and vibrant commitment to this part, to making sure that we're focusing on the problems that matter. It is genuine. When we talk about educating leaders for business and society, I cannot tell you how committed everybody in the school is to this. And so we really are focused on identifying and solving the problems that matter. And you will see that being reflected in the research that all my colleagues do. You will see that in the concerns and the conversations that our students are having while they're here. And you will see that in the kinds of things that the school chooses to invest in. All right, so I'm going to shut up now. And I'm very happy to take some of your questions. So let me see. There's a bunch of questions.
And I would say too, we're getting lots of questions in. First of all, thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes left. We're getting lots of questions in through the Q&A function too. Between that and the chat, we have a few dozen questions. So I apologize in advance. We won't be able to get to them all. I don't know if do you want, Professor Canales, do you want to pick something out, or do you want me to feed you any questions?
I think that you've been reading them, Bruce, and so
yeah.
I think it might be easier for you to tell me which are the ones that capture some of the concerns that people are having.
There are some that were specific to the Mayo Clinic example and the HIV example, the cases that you gave. But I'm going to start maybe with one that's more general, a few that are more general, and maybe one that digs into the slide one of your more recent slides, which asks, how is discovery different from hyperlocal observation?
Sure, I'm going to stop the share so that we can now have more of a conversation. So how is discovery different from hyperlocal observation? Discovery is the result of two things. One is the insights you can get from hyperlocal observation. So hyperlocal observation is just going to give you a lot of data. And it's going to give you complex and messy data. You need to have a good way of collecting those data, and you need to have a good way of analyzing those data to make sure that you have good insights from those data. And then once you use those data to to both kind of combine it with other types of data, but also to generate kind of experiments that test different hypotheses, then you're going to start discovering things about the world that you didn't know before. And so discovery comes from the analysis of the different types of data that you can gather through an innovation process. And kind of observation is about gathering one form of data, which is how things actually work in the world.
Great, that's great, thank you. And I guess another question that sort of speaks to sort of process that came in through the chat. So given your research and experiences in developing economies, how do you determine whether you're asking the right question? Some of these follow-up questions I think touch on things you already talked about, but might be worth sort of teasing out or emphasizing a little further. So how do you know whether you're asking the right question?
What a great question. Well, first you need to test different ways of asking the question, right? You need to you need to not become attached to one particular frame or one particular way of looking at the question. And that's why the tool, which is a tool that we discuss a lot in my class, the tool of reframing becomes really important, right? Meaning identifying what are all the different perspectives that are critical within this problem, who are all the stakeholders, and what different perspectives do each of them bring to the table? And then what is the most relevant question for them? And so let me reframe the issue from all these different perspectives and end up testing or entertaining a variety of different ways of asking the same set of questions, like looking at the same problem from many different perspectives. And it can be kind of two things. One is you may have clear theoretical or empirical reasons to know what the actual leverage point is in a problem. Very often in complex systems, we don't. And so in the Uganda example, for example, it took them a while to figure out that the leverage point was in one of the most unexpected places, which was in these volunteer health workers, right? And so sometimes you need to actually test quick experiments in these different points of the system to see what are the critical leverage points. Once you find leverage points, meaning places where if you push on that point, the system actually moves. That's how you know that you found a leverage point. Then you can start saying like, all right, given that this is the leverage point, what would be the right question to move the system according to their needs? And so basically you end up testing different frames and different types of questions until you find the questions that seem to be giving you the most useful information for making progress. So it's a pretty empirical approach. But it starts with being very humble about your current understanding of the problem.
And I guess maybe as a bit of a follow-on to that, there was a question, this maybe speaks a little bit to this. So it's framed as, is innovation absolutely necessary for a system to be better? And I guess the example was in the Uganda situation. In the example of the filing system, can we help file the healthcare workers file and organize better instead of going straight to automation and digitization? So are there intermediate steps, I guess, that's short of the?
I mean, absolutely, but this is again where being clear about what problem we're trying to solve here, right? And so, yes, maybe helping them organize their filing system would be useful, but it's not going to really help with the problem that we're trying to solve, right? And so part of the reason why it's really important to spend some time truly identifying the right question is that if you don't, then it's very easy to get sucked into solving the wrong part of the problem, which people are going to get excited by because that's an issue that they face, but it's not actually going to help you solve the problem that you're addressing, right? And so being disciplined and clear about what is the problem that we're trying to solve here, and therefore what is the right question to ask. Yes, probably it's important for the Ugandan system to have a better filing process. Not sure it's the best use of resources when the problem that we're trying to address is kind of driven by very different dynamics.
Another question, I'm just jumping on, there are still coming in, there are more than we'll be able to get to by far, so I apologize for that. One that struck me is a question about, on top of large organizations being slow to innovate, can this be attributed to systems in structure or people being hesitant to change? Or I would add maybe a combination. Just some thoughts on sort of the causes behind
Sure.
organizations being slow to innovate.
My conviction, given my experience, is that it's much more driven by structures than by systems. And I will say kind of two quick things. One, just do a quick thought experiment. Imagine kind of a successful but very quote unquote stale or traditional organization where things have been done in a very particular way, versus imagine a radically innovative and fast moving organization, right? Think of whatever archetypes you have for those questions. Now imagine that you take a really innovative engineer from the fast moving organization and you kind of pluck them into the slow moving one and vice versa. And think about which of those two individuals is more likely to drive innovation and kind of be an agent of innovation. And you're probably going to conclude that being in the fast moving organization is just more likely to allow that individual to have an impact, right? But there's a more fundamental reason. If you think about how, and this we discuss this in the course a lot, actually. If you think about how organizations arise, why they arise in the first place, and how they evolve, usually existing organizations have been designed to perfect and protect what they have done effectively in the past. So think about it for a minute, and you'll see that it's actually true of basically all organizations. They have evolved to perfect and protect what they've done effectively in the past. And what that means is that most of the processes, routines, structures of an existing organization was designed to not change, was designed to protect something that we were already doing. And that means that by design, most organizations are going to be resistant to change, and innovation is about change. And that's, again, why I think teaching innovation becomes important, because we need to think about how do we design structures for change within structures that have been designed not to change. And that's the only way in which you can systematically drive innovation within established places.
Just a couple minutes. I have one more question I think that's somewhat on this vein, or in this vein, is so when people, and you made this point, when people hear innovation, they often think of product innovation.
Right.
When you think of it obviously differently, as you explained in this presentation. But the question is, how do you get people to expand their thinking on innovation to include process and business model, which I think you touched on, but maybe a little bit a few more thoughts on that front.
I mean, what I have found, and this is something that I emphasize in the teaching a lot, is the best way to convince people is through data. And you can use two types of data. One is to show, for example, if you look at the most transformative innovations in history, they're usually not technologies and they're usually not products. The most transformative innovations in history usually have been business models, or have been kind of ways of organizing things. And that's true, for example, of the iPhone and the predecessor of the iPhone, which was the iPod. What was transformative about it was not the technology. Like, digital compression of audio had existed for a long time. What was truly transformative about it was the business model that was built around the iTunes store. And that's what transformed the way we consumed media, right? And again, that you'll see that that's true, you know, in the light bulb. And the reason why Edison gets credit for the light bulb is not because he actually invented it. Most of us know he didn't, but it's because he was the first one to understand that you required an entire business model for the light bulb to actually achieve its transformative power. So you can use those type of data, but also just through experimentation of saying like just helping people see what's possible when you begin to think about a different way of designing a business model, and you start showing them that kind of data, then that can be the most powerful way to convince them.
We have time maybe just for one or two questions. The last two are maybe a little bit more personal in terms of your time at Yale. But I guess one of them is maybe hybrid. How do you determine what is a problem that matters and decide on whether you want to act on that specific problem?
That's a tough one, right? Because this can be a matter of opinion. And so one of the big questions is, well, a problem matters to whom? And different problems matter to different people. At the end of the day, however, I think we often lose sight of the fact that the reason why we should care about innovation is about improving somebody's life. And if we're not improving somebody's life in a meaningful way, then why is that a good use of your resources and your time and your energy and your talent? And so, for example, one of my pet peeves with the entrepreneurship, the most prevalent types of entrepreneurship in the last 10 years is that we've become incredibly obsessed with convenience. And if you think about the amount of energy and resources and startups that have focused on just making things a little bit more convenient for people, yet I would question whether those are problems that truly matter and whether that's actually the best use of our resources and our energy and our talent, given that we clearly haven't made the world a better place, not in a significant way. We've made people a little bit, made them in some ways even more stupid and kind of less connected to the world. And again, that doesn't mean that I have something against convenience, but I do think that, at least the way I like to think about problems, I like to think about, are we actually helping somebody's life in a meaningful way? And there's just so much opportunity to work on problems that truly improve other people's lives in meaningful ways, that I just think the opportunities are endless. And there's endless opportunity to focus on things that you care about and that are aligned with your core values, which hopefully are reflected in the organizations that you're working for.
And I guess that would lead to my last question. We're at 1 o'clock now, Eastern time. And I want to thank you, Professor Canales, again for sharing these insights. And I would emphasize, I know you mentioned this, teaching the innovator. The innovator is a core course. This is required of all MBA students. We were certainly the first, and I think maybe still the only school that has innovation as a core feature of the business program. And the question that came through that I want to ask as a final question is, what made you choose Yale for teaching? It's sort of in the vein of what matters and affecting people's lives. And so I'd love to
Sure, of course.
On that.
When I was picking jobs, I had the fortune of having a few options. And the reason why I chose Yale was because I was looking for a place that wouldn't just tolerate, but actually would be excited by the idea that I did research in international settings in developing countries. I wanted a place that wouldn't just tolerate, but would be excited by the fact that my research is interdisciplinary, meaning I combine different methods. I am not kind of a strict economist or a strict sociologist. I'm an economic sociologist that combines different methods in my work. And I wanted a place that wouldn't just tolerate, but that was excited by the fact that I was working kind of at the intersection of academia and practice. Like, all of my research has always been in partnership with governments or with institutions who are actually trying to solve work out there. And I didn't want a place that be like, well, I guess we allow you to do that, but that thought that was a wonderful thing. And Yale has just provided an incredibly generous and supportive platform for me to do the kind of work that I do.
Great. I appreciate that answer. I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. It was very generous of you. There are so many more questions. I apologize. I wish we could get to them all. If you want to email the MBA admissions mailbox, mba.admissions@yale.edu, we'll try to follow up with those questions. And I look forward to continuing to engage with all of you as you're thinking about your MBA journey. I would highlight, if you enjoyed this session, our next faculty speaker series session will be on June 19th. Professor Ravi Dar who is in the marketing department and actually leads the Yale Center for Customer Insights, YCCI. We'll be giving a talk on how consumers think and decide. So he's a wonderful teacher, a fascinating researcher, and it should be a great topic if you're interested. In advance of then, we also have some summer socials with current students, if you want to connect with current students, and we have our next admissions online reception on June 26th. You can sign up for all of those online. We look forward to your participation in any or all of them. Thank you again, Professor Canales, for your time.
And Bruce, just a quick question. Somebody was asking whether this session had been recorded. I believe it has been, right?
Yes.
So you can access the recording.
Yes, we will be sharing the recording afterwards. That question's come up a few times, and I meant to say that, so thank you for the reminder. We will share the recording after this session in case you weren't able to catch all of it or you had connectivity issues. I know a couple of people did. So that will be available. We will be sharing it.
And let us know if and how we can be a resource to you during your process. And hopefully we'll see many of you in the not too distant future here. Yeah.
Hope so. And in the meantime, I hope everyone stays safe and is well and doing your best. And we will hope to be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.